Welcome, everyone, to the Friday, September 27th, 2024 episode of On Iowa Politics. This week on the podcast, more noteworthy Iowa poll results, this time on abortion. Chuck Grassley on a new report about the first Trump assassination attempt. And Iowa's state immigration law is considered by a federal appeals court. Hello, everyone. I'm Aaron Murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. With me this week, our Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief, Tom Barton. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Aaron.
Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times is here. Hello, Sarah.
Greetings, Aaron.
And finally, we have Jared McNett of the Sioux City Journal with us. Hello, Jared.
Go Royals, Aaron.
Are the Royals in it?
Yes, at least as of right now, we're going to be facing the Baltimore Orioles, so they can burn in hell.
I got it. I'm such a National League focused guy with my Brewers that I'm not even aware of what's going on over there in the senior circuit or the junior.
The
junior circuit. Yeah. Yep. All right. First up this week, we return to the Des Moines Register /Mediacom Iowa poll, which this week published the results of a survey of Iowans' feelings about abortion laws. According to the latest Iowa poll, nearly 2/3 of Iowans, 64%, say abortion should be legal in all or most cases, which is a new high since the gold standard poll began asking that specific question in 2008. And a majority of Iowans, 59%, said they oppose the new state law that restricts abortions once cardiac activity can be detected, which is typically around the 6th week of pregnancy, usually before the parent is aware of the pregnancy. And I have written that sentence so many times in the last 2 years, I can recite it in my sleep. Jared, those poll results very certainly noteworthy, given a million different reasons. But honestly, they did not surprise me. The historical polling on abortion in Iowa and across the U.S. has been remarkably steady and clear. A majority of Americans favor abortion being legal in at least some or most cases. That has been clear in polling for decades, again, both in Iowa and nationally. Were you surprised by this, Jared?
I mean, I am always somewhat surprised when you see the results of a poll on legislation and policy that is in such a sharp contrast with the legislators that a state has elected. So that part is always surprising to me with any of these policy or legislative polls. But, you know, even with that, voters are, a lot of them are not coherent in terms of like what their attitudes are and then what they vote on ultimately. So I guess I shouldn't be entirely surprised even by my surprise on that.
Yeah, and we've talked about that in the past, you know, what the reasons people actually pull the levers they do, right?
Yes, the mind of a voter, your average voter, is a complex web.
Without a doubt.
The poll itself, as you were saying, though, isn't entirely surprising, and part of that is because of attitudes we've seen in the Midwest over the past few years since Roe v. Wade was overturned. Mm-hmm. There's the Kansas abortion referendum from 2022 that would have said that the state constitution doesn't guarantee the right to an abortion. That failed by 20 points. Nebraska voters are going to have competing measures to either expand or limit abortion rights, and polling there, although it's a little old, I think it was like from 2 years ago, has shown a majority opposes more restrictive abortion bans in the state. Even in Florida, which has swung dramatically toward Republicans in the past decade plus, they're going to be voting on a ballot initiative to protect abortion, and the limited polling that there's been on that has shown a majority of respondents saying they would vote for the amendment. So you're seeing that kind of support in all kinds of states, battleground states, solidly red states, Midwest, any part of the state you want to look at.
Yeah, so true. And that is such a good point you raised too, to circle back on you hear often at the state house when you see a number like 59% and you'll hear people say, I'd love to have 59 support in any election that I go into, and here you have 59% opposition to a law that was just passed by the majority party. It's always fascinating stuff through a political science lens, I guess.
Yeah, and going back to the Iowa poll in particular, there were things I was legitimately surprised about with not really any caveats, and that was the poll found. I'm just reading from the Des Moines Register story now. The poll found widespread disapproval of the new law among many groups of Iowans, including 71% of all suburban adults, which is the type of constituency you would need to win in swing states. And the other thing that I was surprised by, maybe a little bias on this, but 50% of residents of the fourth district, which is the district that I'm in, favor Iowa's 6-week ban. Given how red the district is, I was surprised that that number wasn't significantly higher.
Yeah, that's a great one, Jared. Thanks for that. I'm with you. That's given the makeup of that district, that number seems low. That is a surprising number to me. That's a good one. Thanks for that. All right. We'll see. I think they might be done with this Iowa poll, so we're gonna have to come up with something else to talk about next week. But maybe they got one left in the tank that we'll see yet. Moving on. In the meantime, the U.S. Senate this week received a new report on the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump at a campaign event in Pennsylvania. It is remarkable at this point that I need to clarify that we're talking about the first of two separate assassination tips on Trump in the last couple of months. Sarah, you talked to Iowa's Republican U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley this week to get his reaction to that report. What did he have to say about it? And forgive me, I can't remember if your story said, was there any new information that we didn't know that came out of this report?
So the report really addressed that Secret Service, there were several radio malfunctions that happened, that it had extensive interviews with the Secret Service staff that were involved. And one thing that Senator Grassley told reporters was one of his takeaways from reading about the report was that there was one person who, one counter sniper who saw law enforcement running with guns drawn toward the building that Thomas Crooks was on, and could have at that point alerted the Trump's detail, but he told the panel it just didn't cross his mind to do so. So that was what, when I asked Senator Chuck Grassley what his takeaways were, that was his main takeaway from that, as a critical shortcoming. And so he was also asked about funding, what kind of funding he thinks that the U.S. Secret Service needs to address these, the security of presidential candidates and presidents, people in public office. And so he said that he supports a $231 million boost in funds for the U.S. Secret Service, and that is part of a U.S. House measure to fund the government and avert a shutdown. So he supports that, but he wasn't ready to commit to any more or less funding until there's more information and a greater review done on what resources the U.S. Secret Service needs. But he did say that he wants more accountability for the Secret Service personnel involved in that incident. He said, quote, "There's been no action taken against those people who screwed up. And I always say in this town, if heads don't fall, nothing changes," unquote. So it seems like Grassley and others still want to see more accountability and more people, I'm paraphrasing here, but more people to lose their jobs essentially after this failure. So, and yeah, just background as a reminder, this was the July 13th rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The gunman was able to climb onto a roof of a nearby building to where Trump was having his outdoor rally. He had a rifle. He shot 8 rounds, grazed Trump's ear, killed one attendee, and injured 3 others before a counter sniper shot and killed him. And so the report really laid out in detail some of those failures by the Secret Service to take command of the situation, failure of their radios to communicate information about threats, and then a failure to secure that building and that site.
Yeah. Did Grassley give any? Well, I mean, I guess I was going to ask, did he give any indication? Because the Senate passed a similar bill regarding expanded Secret Service protection, but you said the one that they were talking about is in the avert a shutdown package. Is that right, Sarah?
That was the funding portion. Yeah, he was
Okay.
asked specifically about what funding the Secret Service
Yeah.
needed, and so he talked about that boost in funding in the continuing resolution to avert a shutdown.
Yeah.
And then he said just kind of generally that he thought that the Secret Service should review their
Yeah.
policies, protocols, and how they attend events and attend to security.
This is, forgive me for putting you on the spot here. I don't know if it came up that what is our latest at Thursday at 3:00 on the shutdown, the continuing resolution? Is that going to get done? Do we know? Has anybody been following that? Did he talk about that during the call, Sarah?
No, he didn't.
Okay. All right.
I'll do some checking on the next person's question.
Yeah, there you go. Look that up for us while I talk to Tom. Thanks for that, Sarah. Moving on to Tom, we head back to the courtroom where we just haven't spent enough time lately, so it's good to be back in the courtroom. Tom's taking his term. He listened in on a federal appeals court hearing again Thursday afternoon, so earlier Thursday. Hearing on arguments over Iowa's new state immigration law. The federal judge blocked that law before it went into effect. That decision was appealed. Tom, you heard the arguments earlier today, earlier Thursday. What were you able to glean from that?
Yeah, so there wasn't a whole lot to glean from maybe where the three panel or the panel of three judges from the Eighth Circuit Court, where they might be leaning on whether or not to affirm or uphold the lower court ruling, keeping in place the preliminary injunction. The judges didn't ask a lot of questions, and the questions they did ask, not much can really be kind of extrapolated from, again, what their position might be as they're looking at Iowa's law and the judicial lens that they might be using to view Iowa's law, and whether or not, again, to allow it to be blocked from taking effect, whether to allow that preliminary injunction that halted its enforcement, or to lift that and kind of let further legal proceedings play out. So just a bit of background. So this is over a state law that was passed earlier this year. It would have taken effect July 1st, but as you mentioned, the federal district court enjoined it from being enforced. The law would allow the arrest and forced removal of immigrants in Iowa if they had previously been denied entry into the country. The U.S. Department of Justice and civil rights organizations sued to stop the law, arguing that it's unconstitutional because it tramples on federal sovereignty over immigration, ensnares those with legal status, and creates chaos in orderly immigration enforcement. So today we heard arguments, and then Iowa Republican Attorney General Brenna Bird appealed the lower court's decision on the state's behalf, arguing that Iowa's law simply mirrors federal law, which they claim is not being enforced by federal authorities. So today we heard arguments from Iowa's Solicitor General representing the Attorney General's office and the state of Iowa. We also heard from an attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice, and then a attorney for and now I'm blanking on the name of the organization, the Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice, which is representing a couple of plaintiffs in this suit. Iowa Solicitor General Eric Wesson said that Iowa is responding to an unprecedented immigration crisis by creating this state crime of illegal reentry. He told the panel of judges that the plaintiffs in this case have failed to demonstrate that they would be harmed by enforcement of the law, and that unless every application of the law is unconstitutional, states should be allowed to demonstrate that the law can be applied consistent with federal laws in the Constitution before a facial injunction is entered by the court. He gave the example of a person previously deported who re-enters the United States, kills someone, and is charged with both murder and the crime of illegal reentry. He said that it seems odd that the foreign policy interests of the United States would be affected by the illegal reentry lesser charge, but not by the murder charge. And it also seems odd that, assuming that there's no lawful reason for that person to be in the United States, that charging that person and convicting him of illegal reentry would itself be a violation or a conflict with federal law. If such a person, after serving a sentence, was issued an order to return and was presented at a port of entry, it's hard to believe that person is going to be turned away and that federal authorities would be unwilling at that point to cooperate. Wesson also argued Iowa law doesn't touch on removal or entry. I think this gets a little bit technical in the weeds, but rather illegal reentry and refusal to comply with an order to return, which he argued is separate from removal orders. The attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice countered, saying that entry and removal are core of what has long been held for almost 150 years to be the exclusive federal power to control immigration. The attorney representing the Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice argued that the law puts even those immigrants who are authorized to be in the United States at risk of being deported, and gives local rather than federal law enforcement the near impossible job of figuring out the complex documentation status of those with whom they interact. And she gave the example of an Iowa high school student who they used a pseudonym, Anna, for. They used the pseudonym in order to protect her identity. She was born in Honduras, where her father was murdered and her sister kidnapped, and was brought to the United States as a child by her mother fleeing persecution. They were deported in 2020. Shortly after, still fearing for her life, Anna returned unlawfully as a child. She applied for and received asylum and is living in Iowa lawfully with an Iowa family and attending high school. But the attorney argued under Senate File 2340, she could be arrested, prosecuted, and ordered to return to Mexico, not her native country.
Yeah, and that was one example they gave at the the first federal hearing as well. It's going to be interesting, and we don't typically have a timeline on these things, right?
So yeah, the appellate court typically issues decisions within 3 to 6 months, but could take longer. But you are right, there is no deadline for the court to respond to the state's request to lift the injunction. It should also be mentioned that should the appellate court uphold the injunction, the case could then be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I asked attorneys representing these civil rights groups, including an attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union, who said that, it seems very likely that if it's not the Iowa law that gets kicked up to the Supreme Court, it's likely that one of these other state laws that are very similar to Iowa's law, including the Texas law and Oklahoma, I believe recently passed a similar law, and Iowa Attorney General Brenna Bird told reporters earlier this summer that she too thinks that Iowa's law or a similar law in another state is likely to make it to the nation's highest court to kind of settle this question of, do states have the right, the ability, the authority to enact these type of laws?
There you go. So that's obviously something we'll be following along for and see what happens. Sarah, what's our shutdown prospect look like?
Yes, so the House passed it yesterday, and then the Senate passed it last night.
Oh, there we go. Hot off the press. Shows
Yeah.
I have such bad tunnel vision on this beat that I sometimes struggle to remember to pick up the paper and read what's going on outside of Iowa too. So there we go. Thanks, Sarah. When we come back for next week's show, we will be just more than a month out from the November election. As I say that to a group of political reporters, how's everybody feeling about that? I see gritted smiles. Is that the consensus? Like, no. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting 4+ weeks to the finish here, and we got so much to talk about still in these, especially these congressional races. So we'll get into that more for the home stretch here in the future episodes. That's it for this one, though. Thank you for joining us. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or on YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. You can also find the podcast each and every week on your preferred Gazette or Lean newspaper website. And now that you've listened to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you're also subscribed to the On Iowa Politics newsletter, where every morning in your inbox, you'll receive all the latest politics and government coverage from our team. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. I stay up late at night doing that thing before bed. The least you can do is give me a subscribe and an open every morning for me. Help me out, folks. Lastly, don't forget that the work you heard from everyone here today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mesa City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. I love telling folks literally river to river in Iowa our coverage reaches. For Tom Barton, Sarah Watson, Jared McNett, and our guest producer Liz Kennedy, I'm Aaron Murphy. Be well, everyone, and be good.